Good afternoon, everybody. According to my computer, it is now 2 o'clock Central European Time. And I would like to welcome you all to our webinar, which is about monitoring, reporting, and verification. I'll go back to that. Monitoring, reporting, and verification for marine carbon dioxide removal. This is the launch of our document from the European Marine Board. And it's on the occasion of the Ocean Thematic Days at the UN Climate Change Conference, COP30. Some housekeeping rules. Maybe I should say who I am first. I'm Sheila Heymans, the Executive Director of the European Marine Board, and I will be your moderator today. Just some housekeeping rules. Please make sure that your name is clearly entered so that when you ask a question, we know who you are. It would also be helpful if you put where you're from in there. And if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Once we've had all of our talks, then I will look through the questions and ask them to the speakers. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function. That will only be visible to the hosts and the panelists. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on both the Marine Board website and on our YouTube channel. Quick rundown of our agenda for today. The welcome that I'm just giving you now is by myself. Then we will have the launch of the document, which will be done by Helen Murray, the coordinating author. She is from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway. We will then have a response from the European Commission, George Pinto Antunes, who is a policy officer from the Directorate General for Climate Action of the European Commission. We will have another response from the international community with Oliver Gedin, who's a senior fellow from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs and in Germany, and is one of the vice chairs of the IPCC Working Group number 3. And then we will have a Q&A session with moderated by myself, but with all of the speakers and all of the members of the working group who would be able to answer any of the questions that you might have. Then at about 25 minutes past 3 at the latest, Fiona Grant, who is our chair from the Marine Institute in Ireland, will give you the closing remarks, and we will end the webinar on time at 3:30. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and hopefully Helen will be able to share her screen for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sheila. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, and it's in full screen mode.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So it's my pleasure to be here today and present this Future Science brief on behalf of my co-chair, Olivier Sulpice, and the working group. So this is the working group. I would really like to thank them for their contribution to this process and the report. And I think I've learned a lot from all of you over the past year and a quarter or so that we have been developing this science brief. So the objective of the report is to provide state-of-the-art overview on the topic of monitoring, reporting, and verification for marine CDR with relevant and actionable recommendations for policymakers, scientists and practitioners, and also research funders. So it's generally written from a European perspective, but due to the nature of marine CDR, it may also have global relevance. And we have tried to write it to be understandable for a wide audience. And the report provides a summary of a few different marine CDR methods, key challenges for monitoring, reporting, and verification. It assesses the current observational and modeling capabilities, as well as the state of regulations and governance for marine CDR. We move on to highlight major knowledge gaps and uncertainties, and the knowledge needed as well for MRV of these different methods, and end with some actionable recommendations. I would like to point out, though, that the report does not take a position for or against marine CDR as such. So marine CDR is the concept of taking up carbon from the atmosphere by making use of the oceans. So we can do this by either enhancing natural processes or be more technology aligned, if you like. We have divided the methods into biotic methods and geochemical methods. So to say that this is an umbrella term of a range of different ways of reducing the concentrations in the atmosphere by making use of the oceans. And the storage ends up in different ways for the carbon. So whether it is sorry, it ends up in the deep oceans or in the sediments or in geological formations, or whether it is simply stored as dissolved inorganic carbon across the ocean. MRV, so it's the systematic process of monitoring, reporting, and verifying carbon removals and their impacts. So this is to ensure that the removals are real, additional, and transparently documented as well, and scientifically robustly quantified. So this process provides confidence that the climate benefits are genuine, measurable, and can independently be validated. And some of this is quite technically challenging as of yet. So there is no single marine CDR law, but there are several existing international instruments that already create obligations and that are highly relevant for MRV. So you have instruments like the Law of the Sea Convention or the BBNJ Agreement or Kyoto and Paris on the Convention of Biological Diversity. And they set the broad legal context for activities in the ocean. So they include duties to protect the marine environment, for instance, and prevent significant harm, and that you should cooperate and report emissions and removals as well. So any marine CDR activity, they will have to operate within these frameworks, even though none of them have marine CDR specific MRV rules. Many of these agreements, they imply or explicitly require environmental impacts assessment, especially if the activities may cause significant harm. As for the London Protocol, it's the most specific out of the international frameworks on marine geoengineering, as they call it, which now also then covers some forms of marine carbon dioxide removal activities. Sorry. And not just waste disposal as it used to. So it effectively creates MRV-like obligations. But basically the current landscape is a patchwork of general principles, and there's nothing specifically designed for marine CDR or MRV of marine CDR. As for Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, it creates an international carbon crediting mechanism that let country trade verified emission reductions or removals, and that can help countries meet their national determined contributions or NDCs. It does set reporting requirements, but does not explicitly mention MRV. But it can be seen as setting a template for MRV of removals. And for projects with reversal risks, which can include marine CDR, this mechanism requires continued monitoring beyond the initial crediting period. So our ability to detect and attribute marine CDR signals is fundamentally limited by gaps in the ocean carbon observing systems. So both subsurface dissolved inorganic carbon and surface CO2 measurements, they show strong spatial and temporal biases, and they translate into uncertainties in baselines and variability and also model data integration, which can be important for MRV. So these figures here shows that there are gaps in depth coverage, regional sampling, seasonality, but also long-term consistency. And there's been a reduction in the number of observations over recent years, which is a concern. So strengthening the observing system is important for credible MRV frameworks. Models will also be important for MRV, marine CDR, but they operate at different scales, and each scale answers different MRV relevant questions. So there's no single modeling approach at the moment that can capture all processes. So whether it's near-field plume modeling or global carbon cycle feedback. So you may need a suite of different models and integrate these across scales. This table is a guide to where MRV elements are ready at the pilot stage today, and where targeted MRV developments and validation are still needed. So MRV readiness is uneven across the different marine CDR methods, and only a few are sufficiently mature for baseline and monitoring frameworks, for instance, for controlled pilots scale deployment. Whilst most of the methods remain partially ready or not ready at all when it comes to MRV. So developing robust, transparent MRV frameworks remain a central challenge for the field overall. And this kind of table should be revisited and updated as more evidence evolves. So as a point to move forward, we try to establish this sort of six-pillared framework for support of robust MRV for marine CDR to try and ensure that removals are real, additional, durable, and safe for ecosystems and ocean health. Where, the baselines, they set the reference conditions for the natural ocean behavior without any marine CDR intervention. And additionality and attribution validate the intervention. And durability ensures the climate benefit in terms of the carbon staying out of the atmosphere for a long time. But then we also say that measuring non-CO2 gas emissions and biological indicators, that this can help safeguard against unintended harm. So we have begun to build such a foundation, if you like, for the various marine CDR methods that we considered in the report by filling in some of the building blocks of these pillars. So these can become like checklists, if you like, for MRV projects, but they are considerably illustrative at the moment and non-exhaustive, and a starting point. So this example is for ocean alkalinity enhancement, which requires then this comprehensive and multipolar approach to MRV because it alters not only the ocean chemistry and can spread over areas, but also has carbon cycle and further ecological consequences possibly. So these kind of checklists, they highlight method-specific requirements, but also ensure comparability across the different marine CDR methods. But it was quite important for us as a working group that we recommend that rapid reductions in CO2 emissions remain the top priority. Climate change waits for nobody. It's happening all around us, and it does not wait for us to develop safe MRV or safe deployment methods for marine CDR. So continuing to cut emissions should remain the focus. Moving on to the recommendations for policymakers and regulators. The first one is to develop a standardized, comprehensive regulatory framework for MRV and standardize the collection and reporting across diverse regulatory fora. Develop regulations for baseline monitoring, covering both carbon and ecology, using this to establish additionality and detect attributes, ecological effects with predefined indicators and adaptive triggers, whether these are sort of stop and go levers for projects. Develop cost-effective, standardized and sustained long-term monitoring and observing systems, which can be coupled with modeling and machine learning if needed. We also recommend to limit both scaling up and co-deploying marine CDR until MRV protocols for individual methods have been proven, and then assess changes in efficacies in co-deployment scenarios. And then consider requirements of key legislations for the implementation and monitoring of marine CDR methods within the EU. Recommendations now for the science funders, whether they are national, European, or philanthropic. We recommend to fund projects to establish baselines for carbon fluxes and sinks, especially those that support development of instruments, allowing high frequency, long-term in situ carbon system measurements. So basically the quality of the measurements is important for MRV as well. Fund projects that produce observational data for the purpose of validating and refining models, particularly for the deep ocean where we know we lack information and understanding, and also models is likely to be quite a lot used, I guess, in MRV for marine CDR. Fund projects to investigate how biological processes respond to environmental change, and ensure that the changes do not compromise ocean health. And fund projects to close knowledge gaps on long-term efficacy, environmental impacts, and scalability. And of course, require transparent data sharing policies, open access, publication, and open sharing of project outcomes for the projects that you do fund. And support practical applications of real-world MRV for marine CDR that also complement fundamental research behind these kind of methods. And also support multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary MRV research projects that scope and map the regulatory landscape, and also projects that engage with stakeholders and local communities. Recommendations for the MRV scientists, practitioners, and project planners. We recommend to establish robust local, regional, and large-scale baselines. Quantify uncertainties in the MRV protocols for carbon removal across scales, including for the instrumental precision, measurement accuracy, temporal and spatial variability, and model prediction fidelity as well. Determine thresholds for unacceptable ecological environmental side effects that would trigger those policy or management responses. Quantify the durability of the carbon removal in addition to the magnitude. And establish how interactions between various marine CDR methods being co-deployed, how they may be credited, and conduct rigorous life cycle assessments, and develop standardized environmental MRV, and also for detecting and attributing ecological impact and non-CO2 emissions. Describe environmental and ecological risks. So first you develop the standardized MRV and then you apply it and describe. At the very least qualitatively, but preferably quantify when possible. And of course, follow ethical principles and codes of conduct for research, and prioritize funding from transparent sources in these rather fast-evolving fields. So if we are serious about tackling climate change, we need to cut emissions now. And if we are serious about marine carbon dioxide removal as a potential tool in the toolbox, we need to get serious about the MRV for these methods. and ensure that we safeguard the ocean health at the same time as we do our bit for the climate. And with those final words, I would like to again thank the working group and also the European Marine Board for their support along the way. And of course, the 5 external reviewers that helped shape the report. And you may download it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helene. That was great. I see we already have one question in the Q&A, so I'm happy for you guys to continue with the questions there. But I think we will go now to the response from the European Commission. So George Pinto from DG Klima, please give us your impression.
Thank you for this invitation. And well, first of all, congrats to the working group on the document, which I've read with quite a lot of interest, and I've already started sharing with my colleagues who are also working on these issues. My intervention will basically center around 3 main takeaways from my reading of the report. And these takeaways come mostly from sort of a policy perspective. So just to give a little bit the scope to my intervention. And I would start my first takeaway already reflecting on your first recommendation to policymakers, which was about the development of a regulatory framework for MRV. I would say that from our end, and particularly in the EU, I think we are already addressing this. In 2024, when we issued the carbon farming and carbon removals regulation, we basically started with the establishment of a voluntary framework in the EU for certifying carbon removals and carbon farming practices, which obviously aim to enhance climate action, but also to support sustainable practices across Europe. The scope of this regulation distinguishes between different activities, carbon farming, as I just mentioned, but also temporary carbon storage, for instance, in long-lasting products, but also permanent carbon removals. So these activities that will securely store carbon for several centuries. I think for the purposes of your work, I think it is also important to highlight that this certification framework not only is related to terrestrial ecosystems, but also to the coastal management. So it also encapsulates the work that can go forward in the next couple of years on marine CDR. This regulation establishes some quality criteria, which tries to ensure that the integrity of carbon removals is key, and it establishes these quality criteria that must be met for the certification. And it includes methodologies for quantifying carbon removals and maintaining public registries to track the certified units. In terms of timelines, we've issued the framework regulation in 2024, but we have now started working on a number of methodologies for the various carbon removal methods. So already in 2025, we will come up with a couple of methodology, but also in 2026, I think we will have to see the first complete batches of methodologies. And I wanted to highlight that as part of these methodologies, we are already conducting some preliminary work on marine CDR. And specifically MRV work on marine CDR for the development of this CRCF framework. And this basically leads me to my second sort of takeaway in my interventions, which is to highlight, I mean, very, very, very happy to note the timeliness of your deliverable. Already this year, we have organized 2 workshops on marine CDR and on MRV aspects as well. So we organized a workshop to discuss enhanced rock weathering, but also ocean alkalinity enhancement, which were preceded by 2 specific papers that were prepared for the discussion on MRV issues for MCDR. We gathered a lot of insights during the discussions, and I think it will be certainly going to inform the decision making in the next couple of years on where the certification methodologies should be developed for integration of MCDR into the CRCF framework. And also, if we decide to go ahead, how best to determine the appropriate certification requirements and MRV aspects. I should also point out that my colleagues in the Commission working on maritime issues, so the colleagues from DG Mare, will also start soon work and discussions on the more classical blue carbon MRV, possible with a view to develop a methodology. The way it goes is that we start by putting together the scientific work, which is then distilled in some assessment, technical assessment papers. This is how we call them. We then have workshops to have discussions with scientists, but also with the broader stakeholders at large. And then a decision is taken on whether or not we will develop methodologies. And as part of these discussions, within workshops, but also a bit more focused, we have set up an expert group with a number of scientists, but also policymakers that provided a little bit input into our work. For what it concerns the work that you've developed, I think it's important to highlight that for us, what has been some of the concerns that have been already highlighted in terms of MRV for marine CDR is the cost aspect, and also try to identify or try to calculate what is the removal potential for some of these technologies, which is important to identify it in order to understand whether or not it makes sense to go ahead in terms of more forceful work. Now, bringing me back to my sort of takeaways, if I can put it like this, on your paper, which again, I want to congratulate you on your work. I think it's rather comprehensive. It's also very robust in what you present. And it gives a very nice reading for us. I will not go into the details of your paper first, because I'm not a scientist, but all from my end, I would like to pick up on a couple of your recommendations and also how you structured the report, again, from a policy perspective angle. So I've already alluded to your first recommendation, but on your second recommendation, where you mentioned the need to develop standardized or the collection and reporting of marine CDR, MRV information, I would also argue that it's something that we have started doing, and maybe I would have perhaps expected to see in the report something about how the present regulatory framework on the LULUCF, so the land use change and forestry, could also be used in the work on marine CDR MRV information. And this is because the LULUCF regulation asks for a number of ways on how member states should report their emissions, and it opens, at least as part the way it has set up the architecture, the possibility for us to have also this information in terms of marine ecosystems. And we are now starting the evaluation of the LULUCF, and it could be an opportunity maybe to revisit how we can make use of the LULUCF in terms of the work that we would like to see on marine CDR. Finally, I think also one of the things that caught my attention, it's the synergies that you have highlighted that could be further developed by, for instance, the European Commission. Maybe to say that this is very much part of our intention as we develop the marine CDR methods, and it would be something that we definitely would like to engage into discussions on the work that you're doing and the experts that have participated in this work. Just to finish my intervention, to say that yes, you have a very good and comprehensive elaboration in terms of the environmental impacts. It's very robust, like I said. But perhaps, and maybe here I'm a bit unfair, because it goes a little bit beyond MRV. But one of the things, like I said, that for us it's very important is to have an understanding of costs considerations, an understanding of removal potentials, because it will be key for policymakers to make a decision. And then maybe to say that, of course, you provide a very good state-of-the-art on very different methods. But for us, it's then important to go a little bit more into the detail and granularity on some particular methods. I've already alluded to at least 3 that we are particularly interested, and I suspect that this could be the start of a good conversation with the European Marine Board. And we can take this forward, because at least for these 3 matters that I've mentioned before, we will definitely like to engage with scientists at large and to see how can we strengthen the marine MRV and CDR issues. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to engage in the discussions later on.
Thank you very much, George. This was very, very helpful. Okay, and then finally, our next intervention is from Oliver Gedden, again from sort of the IPCC, but Germany. Oliver, giving the international perspective. I think that's what I need to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sheila. Yeah, indeed, we always say we have a home affiliation, which is not the IPCC, and then on top of that, we're also in the IPCC. And what I'm giving now is not the IPCC position on MRV for marine CDR. I also think there is no position, and there has not been much on MRV specifically in reports of the IPCC. On marine CDR, it has in AR6, and it will have more in AR7. For example, the Working Group 3 report will have a whole chapter on carbon dioxide removal, and of course, marine methods will play a role here. So first of all, congratulations to this very comprehensive report. Thanks for highlighting all the challenges and some avenues for possible solutions. So, I mean, of course, as scientists, we knew that tracking carbon fluxes is hard, especially in terrestrial and marine environments. But of course, it's crucial if we want to quantify what removal methods actually achieve. At the same time, I think we also need to benchmark everything we are going to do in the future against how we do things up until now. And even with, let's say, methodologies for the estimation of very straightforward processes like transport emissions, we often, for pragmatic reasons, use only approximations, only activity data with emission factors. But at least in theory, we could measure it more exactly, whereas for many marine CDR methods, there is not that place where you just go 10 years and take a sample and say, okay, this is what it exactly achieved. So this is going to be hard, and this is going to be hard, I think, harder for removals than for emissions. And I'm talking all the time about removals and emissions because in my IPCC role, I take a somewhat different perspective. And I want to highlight that this perspective seems to be missing from your report, and that is the perspective of national greenhouse gas inventories. Many of the struggles you describe are related to the voluntary carbon market, and also the way accounting would be done, like including life cycle assessments, like looking for net removals as the core number is a voluntary carbon market logic, where the action is happening right now. But like Jorge already mentioned, there are areas for the biotic methods where you could do reporting and accounting already under the LULUCF regulation, which came about with the so-called wetland supplement of the IPCC task force and inventories. And you may have seen that 2 weeks ago in the reporting on an IPCC plenary 2 weeks ago, and IPCC plenaries are the place where member governments and the Bureau meets, and where outlines have to be agreed upon to get new reports started. There was one leftover item, Task Force on Inventory Methodology report on carbon dioxide removal, carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization. And we're now, after second attempt, we concluded on a decision for the 7th cycle, and at the heart of the debate actually was marine carbon dioxide removal, not methods like seagrasses or mangroves or salt marshes, all kinds of blue carbon management. Which will also be looked at because in the IPCC TFI guidelines are also continuously updated. But it was exactly the open ocean methods like ocean alkalinity enhancement, but also direct ocean capture, for example, in desalination plants, was a point of contention. And what this task force and inventory does, they have regular reports. They also have a summary for policymakers in the end, but it's much more technical because it only provides methodologies for the estimation of emissions and removals. And what's different here between emissions and removals, that on the emissions side, it's pretty uncontentious that you try to develop for methodologies that everything that is already happening in terms of emissions. Whereas on the removal side, many governments want methodologies for things actually nobody does yet at scale. So it has the element of giving incentives. It has also this element of legitimizing certain methods, at least in the view of some, usually European governments. And in the end, it's only about carbon fluxes, and it's only about gross carbon fluxes. To give you an example, in wind energy, and that's probably widely accepted, it counts as zero emissions in the energy sector, although we all know we need steel and cement for that. But these emissions show up in a different sector in this case, under industrial emissions. So the numbers for the removals counted, or how they would show up on the books, would be higher as if you do a life cycle analysis and bring everything together and say, this is basically the net removal of this application, which I think at some point when governments really start putting this onto their national inventories and not only voluntary action is involved, will become an important element. And since it has already been mentioned, the CRCF process in the European Union, I think, will now create a link. It's a state-led development of methodologies, but for voluntary action. It does not talk about compliance markets or compliance actions in the European Union, but these methodologies developed will of course influence the methodologies we will later have in EU law for compliance action, like under the ETS, although I think that marine CDR will never be included in the emissions trading scheme. But it will also influence debates now on a global level like in the IPCC Task Force on Inventories, or what is happening under Article 6, which vice versa will also become more important in EU domestic legislation, as we have seen with the preliminary decisions of both the Council of Ministers but also the Parliament on the 2040 target. And what's also important to mention that there is a difference in climate policy or in the compliance regimes between reporting and accounting. Reporting is something that you do on your inventory reports. Accounting is more related to what you put on your NDCs and what not. And this may seem like a minor difference, but it becomes relevant where via IPCC guidelines you create reporting rules, but then SubSter, one of the subsidiary bodies of the UNFCCC, decides what to take up and what not to take up. And that relates me finally to a question you pose in your recommendations, and that was already touched upon in the Q&A, limit scaling of marine CDR methods until MRV is proven. That's a pretty hard criterion. I can understand why you want to do this, and it's a recommendation, but in the logic of national inventories, if it's more like if emissions and removals are already happening, then they should be reported when and where they happen. So this is a major area of contention that only happens on the removal side, not on the emission side internationally. If somebody outside the jurisdiction of the London Protocol would already do ocean alkalinity enhancement, or direct ocean capture, and if you were of the opinion that you can connect these to coastal waters within the exclusive economic zone, because only then it would be counted as national territory, then it should show up on national inventories of the parties to the UNFCCC. So I think in practice it will be more like a co-development of both, and I wonder if MRV will be ahead of deployment of certain methods, or if it will not lag behind, as we can see with many methods. But again, thanks for highlighting all the challenges we have here, and I think it's really super important that we have a close look at the issues overall, but also for individual methods. And also it provides an entry point to look at the challenges in deploying and then measuring, reporting, and verifying. And I'm sure your report will work as a point of reference in the future as intended, not only in Europe, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Okay, so if the authors want to put their videos on, then maybe we can go into the Q&A session. So you'll see that all of the most of the co-authors of the report is here. I suspect all, but I'm not sure if everybody could make it. And I'm going to start with the questions that are in the Q&A. I will remind everybody else that if you have more questions for any of the authors of the report or for our the people who responded to the report, please do put them in there. The first question came from Ian Shepherd, who I'm assuming is the same Ian Shepherd from DG Mare that I know. And he said, you say that you should not compromise ocean health, but how do we define ocean health? Does anybody want to have a go at that one? Helen?
Yeah, I can get started. So we don't have a strict definition of ocean health as such within the report, but it does cover some key components, including like ecosystem integrity. Pardon me, I'm coughing a little bit today. There are also ecosystem services that humans rely on as well. So there's the coupled human ocean system But there's maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem function is really sort of at the core of this, I would say.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add? I think from an ecosystem perspective, it's probably, and from an ocean health perspective, it's not a bad answer. But if anybody else wants to add something, Andreas?
Yes, thanks. So we have a couple of essential climate variables like oxygen, the carbon system, ocean acidification. So these give some boundaries where the ecosystems can exist. And we also have to consider the baseline. So what is the baseline is currently global warming, it's ocean acidification, it's deoxygenation, all putting stresses, and ocean warming, of course, on marine ecosystems. And so it's not a static system. We have to consider any change relative to this baseline, which is currently well defined. It might be more difficult to define once marine CDR should be operational. But that's exactly one other reason why we need MRV, robust MRV.
Yeah. Gabriela?
Yes, thank you. From a legal perspective, also at least at the European Union, and also from an international perspective, usually, for instance, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive obliges its member states to achieve a good environmental status. So what does it mean? It gives a lot of flexibility, but I think Helen captured this. What we have to maintain the ecosystem services, and from a legal perspective and management perspective, we also have to follow this ecosystem-based approach. So there is a constant monitoring. If we're going to deploy a certain or a technology at sea, then the impact assessments become fundamental to actually assess as to what extent are we risking these services at sea.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so then I think we can go to the next question, which is by Larissa Lorenzi from DGRTD, I believe. Larissa's question is, she's saying, thank you, Helen, for the presentation. And she says, regarding the recommendation to different actors, can you develop on the order of these action? I mean, so she asks, are these in sequence or in parallel? Do we want these to happen all at the same time? I think yes. I think the recommendations are not one going, you need to do this and then you need to do this. These are all recommendations that have to happen all in parallel. And from the DGRTD point, they believe that science must lead, not follow policy and industry. So we should prioritize and promote research before moving towards implementation. So not really a question. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that. No.
I think things are happening fast. We do have some science that policy can rely on already, but science is also evolving fast at the moment, both on the research and the development side. So things will need to happen in parallel and perhaps even be iterative.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Will Burt, who says a question about one of the recommendations. Can you specify what you mean by limit scaling? Does it mean staying below kiloton CDR, megaton CDR, or gigaton CDR? Yeah, that's a 100,000 times scale span and probably 1 in 30-year realistic time horizon. So it's important to be clear about what level of scale we are concerned about reaching. I guess it's the scale of CDR that must be in the recommendation. I don't really know which recommendation, so I don't know them all by heart. Does anybody have an answer to that one? No? Maybe we need to go back and might give us more information there.
Yeah, we didn't quantify the scale here as such, but I think it's towards the recommendation for policymakers and regulators to limit scaling and co-deployment until MRV has been proven for individual methods.
Yeah.
So we did not put a number on the exact CDRs or carbon removal amounts there as such, but I'm happy if the working group would like to lend their opinions to this.
Olivier?
Yeah, I think we deliberately did not give a global tonnage threshold. So this recommendation is really to say that we should avoid moving rapidly from small scale pilots to large commercial credit-generated deployments until we have a clearly defined MRV method for the particular MCDR activity that we're talking about. So those actual limits, whether it's kilo or mega or gigatons, I think will really be method or context dependent. And therefore, they will be set by regulators using risk and using MRV criteria rather than fixed numbers. And this recommendation in particular also was written in reference to co-deployments. So there we should really avoid to deploy right now different MCDR methods that are overlapping in terms of the spatial or the temporal areas where they have effects, because then we wouldn't be able to rightfully separate and attribute their effects to a given method.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, well, maybe we'll go to the next question. Adam Leedbetter from the Decade Coordinating Office for Ocean Data Sharing. He says, with a recommendation to conduct, it's moving around, a robust life cycle assessments. Thank you for that. It's a good point. Are there boundary approaches for the models that are recommended so the results can be meaningfully compared? So do we have any boundary conditions that we could use to in these life cycle assessments? Because there are many industry groups that can be looked at as good examples for developing this if we don't have any. So have you guys, the authors on the life cycle assessment and the modeling, thought about how do you link these two?
Elias, would you like to have a go at this one?
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, the most important thing and the most difficult to determine is the reference point. So the discussion started with the health of the ocean, the health of the seas. So the discussion was about some KPIs. Of course, we have different regions with different KPIs, with different salinities, for example, or oxygen percentage. But with regard to the LCA, it is really important to have this reference point and then try to take into consideration the entire life cycle. During the discussion we had, it was really difficult to say that we can continue with this or that methodology. And this is because we all realize that there are chaotic characteristics because of the multiple aspects we need to face. So yes, we refer to life cycle analysis and life cycle assessment, since we need to have an idea about the progress and about the long-term impact of what we measure today. So we're trying to utilize historical data from the past, and we will probably need AI tools so as to have an information and an estimation of what is going to come. This is not a very normal or a very regular life cycle analysis, but we are talking about the oceans. So this is actually an ongoing question with regards to the tools we need to develop for this specific reason.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay. Then the next question is by Juan Ronco. He says, this is a very good example of what should be taken up in the upcoming Ocean Act for the EU, which was promised by Commissioner Cades. The act will build on the Marine Spatial Planning Directive. So carbon dioxide removal in the marine environment will need space and indicators, which is where the MRV comes in. And another interesting point is the regulations prepared by DG Klima on carbon removal frameworks. I guess that's a question for you, George. Are these ocean proofed? It was actually one of my questions, so I'm very glad that Juan picked up on it, because I'm sure he's more elegant in asking it. And then he says he imagines the answer is yes. And if you mentioned the collaboration with DG Mare, so maybe you can give an answer to that, if you've really taken in the ocean proofed those.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm not sure what you mean by ocean proofed, in the sense that the CRCF regulation, well, which is already there. So it basically establishes a general framework. It tells what is the scope of what you want to do. It tells how we're going to do it, and sort of what are the requirements that we need to adhere to. And this pertains both to terrestrial systems, but also to coastal, and in that sense, I would say also ocean. So in that sense, yes, meaning that we are taking into consideration also the maritime ocean side of things. Now, the CRCF is a framework regulation, and it needs sort of secondary legislation to basically elaborate, but also detail for specific methodologies, how are we going to actually do it, and how are we going to certify units of carbon removal in those ecosystems. And the work that we are now starting, that will pertain mostly to the maritime side of things, has just started. So we just had 2 workshops now in September. And we will start now also with discussions on the blue carbon, so at large. But once those will be there, and I'm not saying that they will be there because there still need to be a decision taken on whether or not we're going to develop these methodologies, these will certainly be ocean-proofed. But it's still ongoing work, let's put it like this.
I think my understanding of the ocean proof concept is that in this new Ocean Act, the Ocean Pact specifically asks that all forthcoming or all EU regulations should be ocean proofed, i.e., whatever you decide to do on land should not have an impact.
Yeah,
I think that's
I see.
Yeah, that's what he meant. And I'm not sure that is something that is always taken into account when regulations are made on land, because by and large they forget about the ocean. So I think that's where he was coming from.
I think I would beg to differ, because I mean, broadly speaking, whatever the European Commission does, it's collegiality. So the different colleagues at technical level, but also at political level, have a word to say on whatever we do elsewhere than not on the oceans. So in that sense, our policies are very much ocean-proof. Whether there is scope to go a little bit more, elaborated in how we do this, possibly, yes. I don't know what it's going to come up in the Ocean Act. I would suspect that there will be, yes, a strengthening of ocean considerations elsewhere in the Commission, in terms of maybe coming up with a specific mechanism institutionally, or how we're going to do this. I don't know. So it can only be speculation on my hand. I do know that there is an interest from Commissioner Cadiz to develop these methodological works on blue carbon, and I would say that he would certainly try to use also this Ocean Act to see how he can strengthen this part of his policies.
Thanks. Okay. Next question is from Gideon Henderson. Nice to see you virtually, Gideon. Question for Helene. When talking about funders, you listed national, European, and philanthropic, but much of MCDR R&D is presently being conducted by companies, so generally SMEs or startups. Should this R&D not also be explicitly considered as in scope for these recommendations? I think the answer would be yes. And the recommendations for open release of results is just as important for companies in R&D as it is for publicly funded R&D. Did you want to respond to that, Helene?
Yes, indeed, this is also for commercial entities as well, and in our recommendations for MRV scientists, practitioners, and project planners, it's sort of a little bit baked into there as well. I would say so. We do encourage open sharing, no matter what the purpose of your activities are, and also follow ethical principles and code of conducts as well.
Yeah. Okay. Phil Kittle asks, could you include direct atmospheric cooling, which may be achieved via DMS release by phytoplankton growing under stimulation? So dimethyl sulfide, I imagine, is DMS from a non-chemist. So that's a question. I don't know if you guys looked into that at all.
Yeah, we do mention the dimethyl sulfide emissions a couple of places in the report, and we bake that into the basically in the environmental MRV parts, because yes, DMS may have a cooling effect, a short-term effect as well, because it can make clouds brighter and more effective at reflecting sunlight, and hence have a cooling effect. But DMS may also contribute towards reducing concentrations of ozone in the stratosphere if it reaches there. So, I mean, the oceans they are a natural source for DMS emissions, and this might become higher with some forms of marine CDR. But considering that the impacts may be good or bad, so to say, they might be harmful. Also, we recommend that they should be included in environmental impacts of MRV.
Okay, thanks, Helene. Then another question from Gideon for George. You talked about some of the EU activity towards regulating MCDR. Is there an EU view about the best way to regulate internationally, so broader than the EU? And maybe Oliver would also want to come into this. Helene says that the London Protocol is the most concrete process for MCDR regulation, but is that the right body, or does this better fall under UNEP or IOC or elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I think very, very, very shortly, the answer is not really strong views on this. I don't think it's something that, I mean, from the top of my mind, is something that we're looking at right now. I think we're pretty open. I would suspect, however, that of course we would want these discussions to have a strong scientific environmental underpinning. So this might influence then which sort of the best forum would be for these discussions. I mean, it's not mentioned there, but I would also imagine that the IPCC could also be an interesting way for us to have these discussions. And maybe Olivier might correct me and say that they have already started with these discussions.
No, I will also be brief, and then I will refer to my SWP colleague Miranda Böttcher, who I think is the actual expert on this group on this. You mentioned some examples in your brief, and I think one problem is our overlaps and contradictory overlaps among conventions, treaties, instruments, even sometimes what I would care very inexact and ambiguous language. For example, in a convention on biological diversity, that still calls any carbon dioxide removal geoengineering and says it cannot happen. If that were true, we could not even talk about direct air capture and storage in the European Union, but we do. So the question is, what do these treaties, conventions, protocols say if you take them together, and where can we act on and where not? And I think for the European Union, at least, the London Protocol and the way it looks at ocean alkalinity enhancement and potentially even ocean fertilization has the strongest bind for us, also because on a national level in the European Union by member states, there have been regulatory acts in implementing this. But if you look at into the last, and for example in Germany are going to be changed, but if you look into the last 10 years of international treaties or multilateral, and not necessarily with universal coverage in terms of countries that signed or ratified, the language is totally contradictory, because the knowledge evolves, and sometimes negotiators in one strand, well, do not care about other strands or try to limit the space for others. So I think that's and I mean, since we're not in the age where international law gets the most respect, it could also be that at some point certain things just happen elsewhere in the world, and then we need to react to it anyway.
Thanks, Oliver. Miranda, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, I would just add on to that by saying that as things currently stand, we have a patchwork, as has already been pointed out, but most international bodies refer back to the London Protocol's wording on marine CDR or marine geoengineering, as it's referred to. So this is the epistemic authority within the community of treaties that talk about marine geoengineering or marine CDR. So I see it as the logical place to continue conversations about this topic, and it is ongoing at the moment. As many people know, there's discussions about adding additional types of marine interventions to the relevant annex of the protocol so that they would be subject to assessment and potential permitting of legitimate scientific research under the London Protocol. So I think this is what I would say at the moment. It's not the only way that we could govern these activities, but it is the one that it is referred to by other bodies, and it is the one that has the longest history of structured assessment of what constitutes legitimate scientific research when it comes to these topics. I would add that at the moment, given that the BBNJ will come into force in January, there is a need to work out what counts as equivalent when it comes to especially environmental impact assessment in the open ocean, where the BBNJ goes, quite some steps further in talking about what would need to be done in this space, which would be relevant for marine CDR regulation. And there's a need to really have a conversation between, how these two treaties relate to each other. But I would confirm that what Helena emphasized, that the London Protocol is the most concrete international process for marine CDR regulation at this point.
Thanks. Okay, so moving on to the question by Anandi Tambi. Could we also have a little international overview? Is MCDR implemented somewhere else in the world? And if so, could it be used as a reference? I don't know if that's included in the document to some extent, some examples, Helen or somebody else.
Yeah, we have included some examples of activities within the report. Ocean Visions also has a sort of map, global map that you can find on their website over various activities. So that there has been sold credits from marine CDR activities already, but at a very minor scale. But some has been towards blue carbon management, so coastal blue carbon management, There have also been activities on ocean alkalinity enhancement, a lot of field trials, of course, for ocean ion fertilization. And as Oliver mentioned earlier, direct ocean carbon removal. We also have plants that are working towards this, but there's no large-scale activities ongoing at the international level in terms of deployment of marine CDR at the moment, but there have been projects in the past, and there are plans for more projects. I don't know if anyone else would like to add to this, for instance, Chelsea or Andreas.
Yeah, I'm happy to chip in here as well. I think one of the challenges is that every time we deploy a new approach in a new location, it's checking that it works the same way as it did in a prior location, and does the monitoring strategy that's been developed for one place work in the other. And so I think there's lots of challenges there about, is it reproducible? Are the different approaches very translatable between different regions? And I think that's one of the challenges for scaling as well, is that how much development is going to be needed each time different approaches are trialed in different places. So it's a challenging problem, but I think that's where one of the recommendations will say, actually, unless we actually have real world small scale trials in different places, it's going to be very hard to actually develop these frameworks and protocols. And we have to be able to check that they do actually work in different places for different approaches.
Andrea, did you want to add something to that? No. Very good. All right, so I'm actually going to just I see Gideon has come back with a response, say thank you for your insightful answers on the international regulations. And he says he also agrees that the regulation is contradictory. Some is primarily focused on environmental protection and others give more attention to carbon cycles. And this make it very hard to pursue MCDR at scale. So I think we're all coming to the same conclusion here. Then we have another question from Lauren Memory saying that they might have missed something, but there doesn't seem to be anything about the energy efficiency of MCDR, the energy or material demand and extraction and so forth. I guess this is part of the life cycle assessment, but I see Elias already wants to answer that.
Correct. Actually, when we use a material, when we have an action, when we take measures, we always need to take into consideration the embedded energy and the embedded CO2. There's always CO2 we emit in order to prepare, to process a raw material and have another material that we will use. And of course, we have to take into consideration the energy that is consumed for the material to be prepared and for the action to be conducted. So this is actually the part that is dedicated, the LCA is dedicated to that part.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else on that?
Yeah, I would just like to add that in the report we have a table 8.1 where we also have some column called deployment cost considerations, where also high energy demand for some of the methods is mentioned in there. So of course incorporating this into the full evaluation, including in the LCAs, is of course very important. So thank you to Elias for your response.
Thanks. Okay, we have one question from the Secretariat. The EMB Secretariat can't put questions in the Q&A because we're actually the hosts of the thing. So a question from Angel is looking at the current carbon observations that we do in Europe, that we have control and access in Europe. Are they enough for robust MVR? The general observations that we do for carbon, are they enough? I can see Peter is already smiling. Can we capitalize on other kinds of observations that are currently not included in the carbon ocean observing? And what could be the priorities for the future? Peter.
Yeah, so yes, when people ask me, do I think we have enough observations? My answer is sort of generally no. I think we do not have enough observations. But to elaborate a bit more, it's obviously depending on what type of activity do we want to monitor. Depending on the activity, we need set of different observations. So obviously the question is a bit more complex than just asking like whether we have enough or not. As Helene showed in her presentation, for example, for ocean alkalinity enhancement, it's not just enough to measure carbon dioxide in the surface ocean. We also need information about the alkalinity, or actually about the full carbonate system. We also need information at the surface. We need information at depth. So it sort of widely varies whether we have enough observations depending on the method that is deployed. And also the scale, right? At what scale are we doing these experiments? And that's where we need the background. So, I mean, what we need, so my longer answer, so that the one that is longer than just no, is if we have enough understanding of the background, if we sufficiently understand the carbonate system it plays, and if we understand its natural variability, sort of beyond the climate-driven or even man-driven, like activity-driven changes, then I would say like we're getting at least close to having a perfect system. But as long as we are not sure about the background, as long as we don't have a background on which we can evaluate activity, I would say we don't have a sufficiently strong carbonate system. And I think for most places in the world, this is the case.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question for you, Peter. Do you think that Belgium has a good understanding of the carbon cycles in its marine environment?
I don't think we have a complete understanding. We're working on it, like many countries. It's not only a problem of Belgium. I think it's many countries sort of work on strengthening their carbon system. And there's a lot of, on a European scale, very important developments. And just to mention the integrated carbon observing system as one example, and many other national and international infrastructure components that are implemented, long-term time series, for example, that are continued. These are all important elements, but sort of to be confident about the background and about the additionality, I think we're not there yet. So I think we did definitely need to strengthen the observing system. And what we see at the moment is actually more the opposite. We actually see a more decline of carbon observations, at least at a global scale. This is not obviously true for all regions. So I think what we really need to do is sort of reverse that trend and really knowing how important it is for carbon dioxide removal, MRV, I think we should really reverse the trend and invest more in the observing system.
And so another follow-on question from that is, if we don't know enough in Belgium, is there anywhere in the world where we think, okay, we have got this cracked, we actually know what's going on in the waters of this place, and this would be a place that you could actually do it and really know what the impact is going to be?
Again, I think it's a very, very complex question to answer. So I'm not aware of all the observing system in the world, and whether there is already a place where we have sort of this complete knowledge. To be honest, I don't know whether this place exists. Let me answer this sort of a bit more in a general term. I think at the moment what we have to do is work towards that. When we decide on a trial location, make sure that we have for this trial location the necessary measurements, that it is complemented also by the modeling, because to understand all process, I mean, even if we start observing now at scales that we've never seen, just to understand sort of long-term changes, we also need the modeling besides that. So if we strengthen these two components, at least at the sites where we do the trials, I think we're already gonna come a long way.
Okay. Yeah, I think Phil Kittel was saying there isn't a place in the ocean that's isolated. So I mean, that was what I was assuming, but I was thinking, well, maybe there's something I don't know. And then maybe I'll have another question, and that is, given that you guys know way more about the carbon in the ocean than I do, how far behind are we from what's happening on land? I mean, if you say we don't know enough, do they know enough on land to do this better? I mean, they're doing it, but like, how much certainty do we have of what's happening on land versus how much uncertainty do we have of what's happening in the ocean? I know these are impossible questions to answer, but I think it's a really important thing to think about. So I don't know if anybody has an answer to that. Andreas.
Yes, I can start at least. So I think, well, on land we have established methods, either remote sensing or counting trees, or it's much easier for remote sensing. It's accessible. But still, we don't remote sense the carbon, and we have proxies basically, and we assume we do have some rules, empirical rules. We neglect many things on land, like dissolved organic carbon in soils, which can be degraded, can be moved with groundwater into the ocean in the end. And so there are many, many uncertainties on land as well, which we always have in life, and we can live with it, and we have to mention it, and we have to account for this, maybe by discounting carbon credits or whatsoever. But we cannot expect 100% certainty of every single carbon atom. And that is, I think, well accepted. We just need transparent rules, and they should get the sign right. And they should give some, well, we should try to minimize uncertainties. But I think overall we are not in such different world on land and in the ocean. In the ocean, it's more obvious. We have this open system and water is moving around, and it's difficult to see where the carbon is. On land, it looks easier at first sight, but in the end, then we have seasonal cycles and we have dissolved carbon moving around. Plus, we have ecosystems changing. The soils are often difficult to measure, not difficult per se. And yeah, we have huge shifts that may not be present in all the proxies or the proxy indicators that we use to account for carbon fluxes. But it's more obvious in the ocean, and so the ocean might even lead us to better MRV on land in the end if we have, because it's so obvious, we have to be very careful, we have to get the sign right, we have to get the carbon right. And we can, I think one can learn on land even from the things that are being developed in the ocean right now.
Okay. Oliver?
Yeah, in general, I would support Andreas' stance here. I think one way to look at it is have the ocean focus, ignore what is out there, and come up with very strict requirements that may be unrealistic, maybe already technically, but then another element is MOV cost and what are those bodies who make decisions would want, how strict they would want them to be. So the question is not what is the perfect MRV system, but what is good enough. It's about estimations. And at the same time, and I think that whoever works on MRV should, for ocean CDR, for marine CDR, should take into account how these systems work right now and say, okay, what may be good enough? And at the same time, every new suite of method allows to think about it again and say, oh, I considered what is there. That does not look good. It's, of course, it's not perfect, but it's too far away from being good enough. And we can use the new methods to start a new debate about how it should be and what could be improved. So that works with IPCC guidelines as well. Member governments have to say, okay, we want you to look at it. If you look at the outline of that methodology report, it's also quite open in saying, and every other place you find where guidance is needed. And I should say you can, because I think we have many experts here in this group, but also on the call probably. The author nominations calls went out last week via many focal points. It will be put on the IPCC website, I think tomorrow as well. So it's like, okay, the door is opening again, and you can look at it, you can compare it, and you can also say, well, we found something that we can do in the marine sphere, so why don't we improve in terrestrial methods as well? But it will be iterative, and it will also come around people who are saying, well, look at what they're doing in forestry, so no problem that we don't know what really is going on. Just put a number on it, because that's what they're doing in forestry anyway. And once the number is there and the method is there, the system just runs, because the inventory compilers know how to derive numbers, and then at some point nobody asks questions anymore, and that is a problem. Also, if you do it properly, you will want to keep it dynamic, because 10 years from now you may have much more information about what is going on in the system that you're actually looking at.
Thanks, Oliver. So I see that apparently there were some questions in the chat too, which I wasn't taking account of. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask them, and if you have quick answers, then you can give them. The first one is Fiona. She asks, as a community, we've talked about the risk to the GOOS investments, Global Oceans Observing Systems investments, from the international perspective, and Oliver talks about the fact that there will be need to be co-development for deployments and MRV methodology. Do we need a step change in government awareness of MCDR and the steps needed to implement it safely? Can the challenges with AI development, like the challenges in AI development and the way ahead of regulation, that are way ahead of regulation? So that's a question. I don't know if anybody wants to have an answer. The second question was from Thierry Mouton. Given that numerous experiments have already demonstrated either the ineffectiveness of MCDR methods in relation to the post-industrial increase in atmospheric CO2, ion enrichment, for instance, or the danger of adding byproducts through alkalization, or the unpredictable upheavals they can cause. And number two, it's acknowledged that no governing body or international legal framework is currently capable of controlling these experiments. And number three, sobriety is the only possible way out of the current impasse. Do we think the research into MCDR could be used as a delaying tactic for the necessary reduction of global GHG? So I think we don't have really much time. So you have 30 seconds, Oliver and Elias.
Yeah, on Fiona's question, it will have to be co-development. MCDR is not as dynamic as AI, but our governance system may be as slow as with AI. And on the on what some call mitigation deterrence, I think, yeah, CDR as a promise will be used to say, well, we can still do that. But actually, I mean, even before CDR was in the debate, we were not that good in reducing emissions. So I don't think it's needed to not do what we can, but it's certainly being used for that.
All right, Elias? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, actually, the answer, because at the bottom of this question, there is a direct question. The answer is no. Because, okay, we all know that we have to reduce greenhouse gases. And of course, there are some measures in order not to emit greenhouse gases, but there are other measures in order somehow to after treat the already generated greenhouse gases. There is no silver bullet so far. We work on this, but since there is no silver bullet, we need to take into consideration all the aspects of the weapons we have. So we need to know what to do with MCDR. We need to further develop MCDR solutions, etc., etc.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. I think we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask Fiona to give us some closing remarks. And I'm going to put the picture up so that you can download the document at the same time. So thank you very much. Over to you, Fiona.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sheila. So good afternoon to you all. I'm so delighted that we've had so many participants joining us from Europe and all across the globe. So as we know, today's occasion and launch of the European Marine Board's Future Science Brief on monitoring, reporting and verification for marine carbon dioxide removal coincides with the Ocean Thematic Days at COP30, where we continue to measure progress against the Paris Agreement goals. The challenges are many. Projections show that emissions will be far above the levels consistent with the 1.5-degree pathway. And this future science brief is therefore timely and sends a stark reminder for urgency of climate action to safeguard a sustainable future. I wish to thank the working group co-chairs, Helene Moore and Olivier Sulpice, as well as all of the experts and external reviewers contributed to this important report. My particular thanks goes to Angel Muniz-Piniella and Ana Rodriguez for their own expert shepherding of the process, in addition to the oversight and leadership of Professor Sheila Heymans. We're really grateful to Georges Pinto-Antun from DG for Climate Action and Oliver Gedden, I knew I would do that, Vice Chair of the IPCC Working Group, for your observations and perspectives. The European Marine Board's Communications Panel has worked really closely with the authors and the team in crafting the main messages. And we just really want to reiterate, we're not taking a position on whether MCDR should be pursued, but recommend that rapid reductions in CO2 emissions remain the top priority to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And as Elias said, MCDR is not a silver bullet. So given the ongoing discussions in Belém this week, I really think it's important to close out on a message of ocean optimism, or pragmatism at the very least. The ocean, as the largest dynamic carbon reservoir and life support system on Earth, should be protected. Using precautionary principles, ocean-based solutions, technological and digital advances, and the principles of justice and equity, let us continue to support research teams for science-based guidance to better understand the ocean and its role in protecting society, the planet, and ecosystem health for our common good. Thank you all for your time today. Reminder that the report is available for download. Please disseminate it and the recommendations therein. So thank you so much from the team in Ostend and from myself in Dublin. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.